Hi, this is Irina K and my channel Astrobabushka. I am a Vedic astrologer and I apply ancient knowledge that is more than 3,000 years old to modern times. In this series of videos, my goal is not sensationalism. It is to prove that astrology, when used carefully, of course, can complement psychology and investigative work. That it can highlight warning signs, karmic imprints, and psychological fractures that otherwise remain hidden. And most importantly, to highlight the future periods that are most dangerous for person himself and for society. I challenge myself first to look at the birth chart without any prejudice, without history, without knowing the crimes behind the name. To analyze it as if it belonged to just another person, my neighbor, your neighbor, just a regular person, and then to see if the stars reveal what psychology, psychiatry, and law enforcement later confirmed. What horrifies me the most is not only the crimes themselves, but the fact that so many of them were totally preventable. Astrology gives us one more lens, one more tool to recognize these patterns early. If we learn to read them, maybe one day many tragedies can be avoided. Today we'll look at the chart of Fritz Haarmann, known as the Butcher of Hanover. And traditionally, I would like to start by reading the words of Ted Bundy from one of his interviews. We want to be able to say we can identify these dangerous people, and the really scary thing is you can't identify them. People don't realize that there are potential killers among them. How could anyone live in a society where people liked, loved, lived with, worked with, and admired could the next day turn out to be the most demonic people imaginable? Ted Bundy, I'm taking your challenge, and with the help of astrology and teachings that are more than 3,000 years old, with the help of teachings of Rao and Mr. Goel, I start this challenge to prove that astrology can help government to prevent future crimes. And another note or phrase by Edmund Burke, I like to add here: the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Let's do something. So, as always, I start the reading of the chart without knowing the story. But just for people who doesn't know who he is, because he was born in the end of 19th century, and so he was pretty famous back then in the beginning of 20th century. He did all his criminal acts. I just want to say that I think his nickname was a vampire because he was biting into neck of his victims. He, a man who appeared charming, helpful, even respectable, yet beneath the mask lived one of the most disturbing shadows of the 20th century. Now, let's start with my notes to his chart before I learned anything about him. I always start with the moon, and moon we see here is outwardly, like just from the first glance, it's with Jupiter. When moon together with Jupiter, it creates Gajikeshwari yoga, and it gives greatness, it gives royal status, but it's not always as good as it seems. So together with Jupiter, they are in a 10th house. So he was born leaving the first
12 years of his life actually under the Jupiter planetary period. So that's supposed to give him a royal status. Not like royal status, it should be like when it's much more beneficiary in the chart. But I'm just giving the idea that it rises, it's supposed to give rising in life. It's supposed to give a good position in life. It gives the visibility, popularity. And so because it was the first 12 years of his life, most likely he was born into wealthy family. Definitely not poor. So moon in Pūrvabhādrapadā nakshatra, and this nakshatra has two faces. It's spiritual asceticism versus fanatic destruction. And this has to be highlighted right from the beginning, because this nakshatra is one of the most dangerous and one of the most uplifting at the same time. There's a very strong dual forces here. It can be very good and very bad. So especially considering that the ruler of Pūrvabhādra is Jupiter. So again, it's these topics of duality is magnified here. So Jupiter is retrograde. So it's losing, when a beneficiary planet is retrograde, it's losing its protective force. And in this chart for Taurus, Jupiter is ruler of the 8th house and the 11th. 8th house is traditionally the worst to be ruled. So it weakens even more the protective forces of Jupiter, and it turns its expansion, because Jupiter is a great expander, amplifier, and it turns it to the topics of the 8th house, which is taboo, esoterics, occultism, sexual topics as well. Jupiter is in the nakshatra Śatabhiṣaj, ruled by Rahu, and again it sends us to the 8th house topics. Śatabhiṣaj is another sharp nakshatra. So we already have Pūrvabhādra, we have Śatabhiṣaj now. It's 100 healers. Not an easy one. Again, it can bring person to the great enlightenment, great awakening, but it can also bring person to the worst of the worst. So it depends on how it plays out in the chart. There's a parivartana between Jupiter in the sign of Saturn and Saturn in the sign of Jupiter. So this brings even more strength to these planets. It also intensifies the karmic debts through social networks, gangs, and big circle of friends, the topics of 11th house. So for this person, most likely it will be very important for this person to be important in his circle of friends. And most likely, because they are strong and they're in parivartana, in exchange, the most likely this man, he will have an ability to create his work through his social circles. So it's going to be interconnected themes: his appearance, his career, and 11th house of his environment. Now, Jupiter is under tight 7 house aspect with Uranus in Leo in the 4th house. They are only 5 degrees away from each other. Because we see here Uranus and Uranus here in exile. So he's not happy here. That might, because we have Moon and Jupiter together in the 10th house, it gives us this idea that outwardly the childhood seemed respectable, but with protective force of Jupiter was compromised. It was hidden trauma, secrecy, or criminal influence at home. On top of this, Uranus, the planet of shock, the planet of rebellion in the 4th house, in the house of inner peace, and it's not happy here, we can expect difficult childhood, in simple words. Jupiter in tight sambandha with Mars being in the first house. Whenever Mars in the first house, here is also retrograde. I myself have Mars in the first house, and of course it depends on the whole chart itself, but especially when it's retrograde, there's a lot of auto-aggression. A person doesn't really know how to properly use this stress and aggression towards something good. Like, for example, the sports, or so he needs to learn. He needs to learn from the beginning of his life, and probably he needs a good mentor, and that's we need to see how the father figure will play out, if he taught him something in the childhood or not. So, by being in a tight square, also here Mars, by the way, with a tight conjunction with Pluto, again adds combative force to the person. Now, Jupiter in Kendra Sambandha with Mars, and so there's a very strong connection also with Pluto. Mars in Kṛttikā nakshatra, which symbol is knife, and it's an enemy sign. So Mars is not happy, it's retrograde, it's with Pluto, and it's in Kṛttikā, and the ruler of the Kṛttikā is Sun, debilitated in the 6th house of fights. So there, right from here, we see there's like a loop of the major influence in his first years of his life that are very difficult, very dark. The benefics are lack of their good and positive protective energy. So the Kṛttikā, again, it adds sharpness, cruelty, and cutting tendencies. The symbol is knife, and it literally links to knives or biting. So there's a tension between public image and inner aggression, and this inner aggression turns into auto-aggression. It's potential for, and it's also, there's a potential for violence that will be masked under beautiful, high status charisma. So, first years of his life can be seen as good uprising, but there are malefics involved and sharp nakshatras. Now, also Revati, oh my gosh, also Saturn and Revati. Revati is the last nakshatra, and Revati also can bring person to the highest highs, to the enlightenment, or to down path, the downfall. On top of it, as I already mentioned, Jupiter's nakshatra ruled by Rahu, and Rahu in Sagittarius. So we see here in this chart 3 planets being 4. Ketu, Rahu, Sun, Venus, and actually Uranus too. All these planets are debilitated. And they all connected to his first years of life. This is very hard combination. And Rahu in Sagittarius, it's called criminal Rahu when it becomes when it stands in Sagittarius. Hitler had it, by the way. So it activates again the darkest parts of the eighth house, distorted philosophy, taboo obsessions, underworld of belief. Now, whenever we're talking about Rahu, Rahu is influencing his 12 years, first 12 years of life, his childhood. There's also Ketu, of course, influencing, because it's the tail of the dragon and Rahu is the head of the dragon. So, and Ketu in the second house, it's also debilitated. And the second house is the resources, its money, its values. So here we see the severance from wholesome speech, values, family bonds. It can be also coldness around nourishment and resources. Now, because the person has a Taurus Lagna, he loves comfort. He loves everything beautiful and expensive. He must likely have this pleasing persona. His orientation in life are very, material. And that probably made him frustrated, especially in the beginning of his life when Ketu Rahu was directly on by the Jupiter planetary period. Now, around ascendant, we see that it's hemmed between malefics, Ketu and Pluto with Mars. So that's a classic papakartari. It's hemmed between malefics. So from one side, there's a Ketu in debilitation, not just malefic, also angry malefic. And another one is Pluto with Mars in Kṛttikā, the knife nakshatra. So it gives to this persona this sharp, cutting, predatory edge, volatility right at the level of body instincts. So what's happening with the sun as a nakshatra ruler of the Mars? It's sun. Sun is debilitated. So sun is traditionally a father figure, and it's with Mercury. And Mercury is not very much combusted here, just 11%. So it's not burned too much. So the person has this Buddha Aditya yoga, which gives him very sharp intellect. He's strategic, he's technically gifted, and he's good at adapting to the circumstances, adapting himself to environment as well. So he's like street smart. And the same you can say about, by the way, his father. So in the sixth house, because they're in the sixth house, right? Sixth house is all about service, enemy, disease, how to also handle others. And this skill used in conflictual or exploitative settings. From point of view that sun is the father figure, it rules the house of mother. So from this, I would say that probably he was more dominant figure than mother. He was the one who was the dominant and manipulator at home. But because also there's a Mercury that is Dhyana yoga, so that gives that additional level to show us, to analyze his chart, that there were money in the house. Now, here's another strong connection between sun and Rahu, because they're exchanging their nakshatra rulers. Sun in nakshatra Swati, that is Rahu rules, and Rahu is in Uttarashadha nakshatra, that ruled by Sun. So there's a sort of viparita parivartana, so it's exchange between the 6 and 8 houses, and it seems like that gives me the idea that early childhood of this native seemed to be poisoned by with some criminal influence. Definitely secrets, definitely some topics of taboo, secret knowledge, skeletons in the wardrobe, hidden losses. So 8th house is using Bhavat Bhavam. 8th house is the 12 from 9th house. The 9th house is the house of father. So additional confirmation that there was something dark behind the scenes from the father side. Father was doing something shady for sure. It can also echo back to great grandparents on either side, on maternal side and on paternal side. Using deeper charts such as D12, D40, D45, it seems like from both sides we can see some negative influence on the person, on the genetical level as well. So getting back to the native, he's Lagnesh, Venus, is debilitated. It's one of the planets here, multiple planets that are debilitated. And it's under the aspect of Saturn. It's very strong. It's in parivartana. It's creating dhyana yoga. It's yoga karaka. It's in an 11th house in Revati. So love for this person can become like a clinical or compulsive, and it creates like its creative intelligence is used more for calculations. In nakshatra, in Navamsha chart, Venus is with debilitated Jupiter that doesn't have, I believe, much of cancellation. So it's furthermore making lower the points of, it's lowering the beneficial forces of Venus, so to speak. Venus is exchanging signs with Mercury, so it makes them both more strong, both Venus and Mercury. So romance, pleasure tied to service and dominance dynamics. It can be pleasure through control. Again, pleasure through the 6th house topics, which are I mentioned earlier. One second. There was one phrase that really resonated. Exploitative settings. So it gives the pleasure of doing exploitation to this person. And it's almost like becomes the identity of the person because it's Lagnesh, it's the ruler of the whole chart. Now, so again, very tight connection with the father figure because Sun is also with Mercury and it's sort of participating in this exchange. So two debilitated planets are doubling its force. We can also see another significant point here is Venus is in tight Sambandha with Mars. They're only 2 degrees away, and it is creating a trine. So it's like an open door for open sexual relationship. So the person has attraction to both sexes, female and male. Now, because Mars is with Pluto in the symbol of his masculine power connecting with a knife, and there is a strong connection with Venus. Again, it can be some sort of perversion in sex, doing something with a knife or biting. And again, Venus also under so many influence of malefics. So it's hemmed between Uranus and Sun, which are 2 traditional malefics, and both of them are, one is in debilitation, another in exile, and it's under the strong malefic Saturn. So both ascendant and Lagnesh are afflicted. There is nothing to be done here but to say that the person is also most likely enemy to himself. Now, Venus, Mars. So Venus represents self-image, relationships, and sensual orientation, and Mars is a raw instinct, aggression, and survival drive. And that mix together his identity and his sexual will becoming his identity. And so whenever Venus and Mars interact so closely, and one of these planets are Lagnesh, the native's sexual energy becomes central to the personality itself. And Kṛttikā acts through sharp instruments or primal appetite. Now, because self-worth seeks stability, but instinct Mars cuts it open, the result is internalized conflict, manifesting as a self-destructive behavior, volatile relationships, or obsessive erotic patterns. In psychological terms, the individual experiences pleasure through confrontation and identity through violation, the shadow of Taurus expressed through Kṛttikā's blade. Now, this is where I stopped my initial analysis, and I started to read the actual story of the man. This is him. He looks fine on the photo. I mean, you would not think that this is some monster. But nonetheless, he's definitely one of them. So he found guilty of 24 of 27 murders for which he was tried. Haarmann was sentenced to death by beheading in December 1924. He was subsequently executed by guillotine in April 1925. Haarmann became known as the Butcher of Hanover, Der Schlachter von Hanover, due to the extensive mutilation and dismemberment committed upon his victims' bodies, and by such titles as the Vampire of Hanover and the Wolfman, because of his preferred murder method of biting into or through his victims' throats. I mean, at this point, everything is pretty much clear in this chart for me. But by making further investigation, his Jupiter was stationary direct, and a moment of enormous potency when planet symbolic forms becomes highly concentrated. Stationary planets act like amplifiers even more, on top of Jupiter being amplifier, and it's station direct. It becomes even more exaggerator. So, and the themes dominate the life story for better or worse. Here, Jupiter, the planet of wisdom, morality, and higher low, was sitting at 10-degree Aquarius in conjunction with royal fixed star Fomalhaut, one of the 4 archangel stars linked to Archangel Gabriel, the messenger of divine vision. Fomalhaut represents idealism, imagination, and pursuit of purity, but when afflicted, it brings inversion, the fall of the idealist into obsession or scandal, in front of everybody's eyes. Jupiter in 10th house, the public image. So in Haarmann's chart, this noble placement was corrupted. Jupiter is retrograde and stations direct, but he's still sort of retrograde. He almost stopped. And ruling the 8th and 11th house, domains of death, secrecy, and distorted alliances, on top of ruler of nakshatra, also Rahu. And it's exchanging with the sun. So there's like a direct correlation between the influence of the father, of the mother, death, secrets of the family into the person's persona. It stands in the Śatabhiṣaj nakshatra, reminding the 100 healers, yet under malefic influence in parivartana with Saturn in Pisces in Revati, this is the sign of collective suffering on the mass level. He became widely famous due to his deeds, and you can see it through the chart by his Gajikeshwari yoga in the 10th house. The idealistic vibration on Fomalhaut, flips polarity. Instead of spiritual elevation, it manifests as distorted savior complex, where helping and harming become indistinguishable. Fomalhaut's nature from saintly vision to infamous notoriety perfectly mirrors Haarmann's destiny, a man remembered not for greatness, but for the shadow side of the same celestial promise. And I cannot not mention how disheartening it is that so many serial killers were actually institutionalized. And yet, system let them go, and they kept doing their terrible acts. Haarmann initially adapted to military life and performed well as a trainee soldier. However, after 5 months of military service, he began to suffer periodic lapses of consciousness, which, although initially described by medical professional as being sudden signs of anxiety neurosis, were subsequently diagnosed as being equivalent to epilepsy in October 1895, long before he made his first criminal act. The following month, Haarmann discharged himself from the military and returned to Hanover, where he briefly worked in a cigar factory his father had established in 1888. Was he allowed to even work with epilepsy or neurosis? Wasn't he supposed to do some treatment, be under the supervision of medical professionals? At age 16, Haarmann committed his first known sexual offenses, all of which involved young boys whom he would lure to secluded areas, typically cellars, before proceeding to sexually abuse them. He was first arrested for committing offenses of this nature in July 1896. So 1 year after he was diagnosed with epilepsy. Following further offenses, the Division for Criminal Matters opted to place Haarmann in a mental institution in the city of Hildesheim in February 1987. Although briefly transferred to Hanover Hospital for psychiatric evaluation, he would be certified as being incurably deranged and unfit to stand trial by a psychologist named Gerd Schmalfuß. Schmalfuß ordered Haarmann to be confined at the mental institution indefinitely. He was returned to the institution on 28 May 1897. 7 months later, in January 1898, Haarmann escaped the mental institution and, with apparent assistance from his mother, fled to Zurich in Switzerland, where he lived with a relative of his mother and obtained employment as a handyman in a shipyard. Now, here I need to point out two significators of his mother in his chart. In multiple divisional charts, this is almost the only source of support for him. But eventually, even her figure was blemished by his father, who reportedly, Haarmann's father married his mother when she was 41 years old and 7 years his senior. Largely due to her wealth and substantial dowry, their marriage would eventually bring him. So, why at this age was she a widow, or she couldn't find a husband until she was 41-year-old? Was there something wrong with her? And he married her because, and she was older, 7 years than him, just for the wealth. That cannot just, go away without any influence. Haarmann was known to be argumentative and short-tempered and conducted several affairs throughout his marriage. Via his infidelity, he had contracted syphilis in his later years. Despite his father being an authoritarian who had little time for his children and a notorious womanizer, Haarmann's parents remained together until his mother's death in April 1901. Now, I repeat over and over again and keep saying it. Venus is the planet of love and peace and harmony, but when it gets severely afflicted, we can expect the worst. And the most demonic can come out of it. Let's see when the Haarmann first did her first murder. Historical records place Haarmann's first confirmed murder in September 1918. Here it is. It was Mercury, Venus, Jupiter period, and Gemini, Virgo, Libra. We see here these two planets that bring the Lagnesha that is highly afflicted, making parivartana with Mercury so Venus is planet of love, peace, and harmony, and debilitated, and Saturn's giving a cold aspect, and tightly linked to Mars in Kṛttikā, knife. So Mercury's sub-period lord sits with the Sun debilitated in the 6th house of enemies, surface, and conflict, and is part of Venus-Mercury parivartana. So it fuses love, intellect, and service with enemies, control, and compulsion. The perfect astrological trigger for the predator or caretaker archetype. Now, we see in another dasha, the same houses, the same signs are activated. It's Virgo and Libra. Distorted love and pleasure, and enemies, subjugation. So they both simultaneously lighting up the afflicted Venus-Mercury axis. So this period represents the moment when the afflicted energy, Venus energy, flips polarity from the planet of harmony to the planet of compulsion and predation. The most demonic aspect of Venus that I keep noticing is when planet of love, beauty, harmony, and peace is severely compromised and tied to malefics, it can manifest as perverse attraction, coercion, destruction, rather than harmony. In other words, September 1918 was not random. It was the precise astrological window when his chart's darkest potential was fully activated. Now, the transit. On the right, there's a natal chart, and on the left is a transit chart. So Mars was transiting his sixth house over Mercury again, all very tight in aspects. Mars is Karesh in Drekana, so it's Drekana is your own actions, your own efforts. So it make your own actions hurtful, both for yourself and for society around you. But that was not his first offense. His first offense was July 1996. And what do we see here? He was arrested for sexual offense, and his kareshes was in the same degree as his criminal Rahu, but also expecting the seventh aspect dangerous degrees. So we see his Venus, Sun, Moon, and Mercury. It was a new moon, by the way, and it was all aspecting his criminal Rahu. So that was like a trigger. The first documented offense occurred in July 1896, and 3 of his kareshes were positioned in the same degree in opposition to his Rahu. Rahu acts here as a criminal and amplified by Jupiter. It's a perverted teacher distorting values and ideas. When several kareshas converge on Rahu's degree, they unlock that karma, allowing the most forbidden impulses to surface. Those same kareshas cast their 7th aspect on the dangerous degrees, occupied by natal malefics, forming a closed energetic field of desire, defiance, and transgression. Mars as Karesha in his Drikana was transiting the 6th house at the time of the 1918. And the 6th house rules enemies and violations, and when Mars activates it, the internal war breaks the surface. Now, you know, the last click happened in my mind regards this chart when I realized that I missed the very utmost important thing about his chart right in the beginning, on the foundational level of analysis, that both his Lagna, his Lagnesh, his Rahu, they are all tied to his childhood and father, and they are all on the side of Yogacaraka Saturn retrograde from 11th house. So Saturn is casting its third aspect on the Lagna, seventh aspect to Venus, and 10th aspect to Rahu. In the deepest D60 chart, the chart of our past life, our deep level of karma, Saturn is debilitated. We are not, of course, sure that the time is 100% correct, so I would not link it directly to the house father, to his paternal lineage, although if it's really as we see here 6 p.m., then that definitely, that heavy karmic weight came from his paternal lineage. So here lies the invisible axis that holds the entire chart together under control of this Saturn being debilitated and very angry and very strong. It's the final bridge of understanding his fragmented psyche. It's conjunct the open star cluster M29, a faint, scattered group symbolizing dispersion, fragmentation, and souls lost between realms. This image alone describes a karmic being unable to hold cohesion, a spirit fragmented by lifetimes of moral decay and emotional loss. In D60, Saturn being debilitated, marking it's the bearer of unfinished karmic debts from past incarnations. Even there, it continues to aspect Mercury here with a third aspect. It's the unhealed patterns in Mercury, in his intellect, the unhealed patterns in Venus, in his desire, and aggression, Mars. They now all projected onto the current lifetime as a behavioral compulsion. Now again, Revati, when pure, leads soul to liberation and compassion. But when occupied by a retrograde Saturn and tied to M29 scattering, it turns into the exile of the spirit, a being wandering between worlds, detached from empathy yet obsessed with control. In simple terms, the outer mask is a social adaptability, 11th house Pisces. The inner reality, karmic exhaustion, moral isolation, and emotional coldness. And the result, a person whose humanity slowly dissipates, like a star cluster losing its center. After his execution in 1925, scientists kept his head in formaldehyde, hoping that biology might reveal the source of his cruelty. But bones and tissues never explained what was essentially karmic. So instead of dissecting the brain, we dissect the chart. In Jyotiṣa, the birth map becomes the real specimen, preserved not in glass, but in time itself. Every graha, every nakshatra holds the imprint of psychological wiring more faithfully than any neuron. When we look at Haarmann's horoscope, we see the same thing those scientists were searching for. Saturn retrograde in Revati, freezing empathy and scattering the soul. Rahu in Sagittarius, the false prophet, twisting belief into taboo, and Venus and Mars locked in conflict, fusing desire with violence. His preserved head is therefore symbolic, a reminder that the true autopsy of evil happens through consciousness, through learning his astrological patterns, not anatomy. Astrology becomes the lens through which we can look into the deepest level and layers of the psyche. Saturn in Aries is pure personification of black sun, chaos, and the opposition of white sun, the order, and the life itself. And needless to say, soon Saturn will be transiting Aries. So we are heading towards the Saturn in Aries ruling field. Okay, this is it. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next episode of dissecting the minds of criminals through astrology.